So just setting up us to go live. And I'll delete anything from Facebook we had before. Okay. So this is Rainy Bench with the MDI Historical Society, and I'm pleased to be here today with Marie Yarborough, who's a curator with the National Park Service here at Acadia National Park. And I just wanted to thank Bar Harbor Bank and Trust for their continued support of Chebacco Chats and this live series where we get a chance to talk with local historians and authors and people who are doing really interesting research about the past in the Frenchman Bay region. And so I've been really excited to talk to Marie about Thomas Fraser, who you're sort of digging up and uncovering and learning about, and also your process of being a historian and tracing down different types of information and historic documents and research and resources and the different ways and places where they all reside. So I'm looking forward to being able to have that conversation. But sort of before we get too far into that part, who was Thomas Fraser and how did you get to know him?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me on, and I'm excited to get to talk a little bit about him. So, oddly enough, I met Thomas Fraser 11 years ago in February of 2010. That's when I started doing some research for some wayside exhibits and outdoor exhibits out in the Scudic Peninsula. And I started off with having to write an exhibit that talked about the human occupations at Fraser Point. And that's how I met Thomas Fraser. As most of us kind of know by now, or maybe don't, he was the first non-white, non-Native American resident of Fraser Point. He was a free African American, and Fraser Point wasn't named for him, but it was probably named for the earliest recorded landowner, who was a London merchant who was also named Thomas Fraser. So that's sort of who he was, sort of on the surface, and how and when I met him.
Wow. Oh, very interesting. So he lives on this site out on Frenchman Bay, and this site is layered with a lot of history. And certainly his occupancy and his family's occupancy of the site is only one small aspect of that. So can you tell us a little bit about the location and what you know about the history of the area?
Yeah, obviously the place that we call Acadia or Fraser Point or Maine right now has been home to Wabanaki people since time immemorial. So it doesn't surprise us to know that that area at Fraser Point was also ancestral. There was an ancestral Wabanaki occupation there as well. So before National Park Service archaeologists discovered the Fraser homestead and that occupation, they knew there was a previous discovery of different ancestral Wabanaki occupations in that same area. So one little plot of land was home to people, different groups of people for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so the archaeology that was done there by the National Park Service in 1998 and 1999 was done by Peter Morrison and Pam Crane, who are two fantastic archaeologists that worked under the direction of Becky Colwill, who's now at the park, to do an excavation there. And they were the ones that uncovered the homestead and gave us sort of a glimpse into the Fraser family's daily life. The picture, the artifact that you see on the screen there is one of the sort of diagnostic artifacts, and one of the artifacts that help us know exactly when people were living at a certain place. You can barely see it, but at the very bottom of the coin, you can see it's an 1802 penny. And when you find something like that as an archaeologist, you're really excited because you know exactly that it was probably right around, obviously there were people living there in 1802. Some of the other sort of objects that were discovered that connected with that coin to help them piece together what life was like was there were some ceramics from that time period. There was pearlware and redware that were really characteristics of that time period. Think about the kind of dishware that you might find today. And if you dug it up 100 years from now, you could say, oh, that's right around, really popular in 2020 or something like that. So same thing with ceramics and the types of dishes and things that were found at the site. They dated to right around that late 1700s to the mid to early 1800s as well. Some of the other things that we learned from the site of the occupation of the Fraser homestead were they found all animal bones that told us what the Fraisers were eating and what they were probably doing. There were pigs and sheep bones and chickens, and there were white-tailed deer. So we knew they were practicing animal husbandry as a way of surviving, which is obvious. Out that time period, you would be doing that. They were probably hunting and trapping white-tailed deer. Interestingly enough, there was also the bones from a now extinct sea mink, which were discovered in the Fraser family cellar. And that was interesting in that the sea minks, I believe, if I remember correctly, were extinct by the late 1800s or mid 1800s. And until the discovery of the sea mink bones in the cellar, no archaeologists in Maine had found those bones in a historic site. So they had been found in sites that were much earlier. So again, being able to put the Fraisers in a particular time period just based on the artifacts that were left behind was really cool. It helped us really kind of piece together a picture of what daily life was like. So the Fraisers, they fished, they farmed, they trapped, they hunted, and they operated either a salt works or a mill. And I say it that way because the archaeology isn't there to support that, but that's what we heard sort of tangentially, or whatever when you read about anything that's been written about Fraser, it's a very common that they talk about there being a salt works or some sort of a mill at that site as well. So it's a very classic Mainer, and that he and his family did exactly what they needed to survive, whether it was 1, 2, or 8 jobs. They left those, luckily left some of those remnants behind.
So you have this mix of sort of artifacts and tangible evidence that you find, at the location itself, which give you a clue. But what kinds of evidence, in addition to that, have you found and have access to that would give you a clue into his life and what it tells us about him?
Yeah, so I say we, but it's really, I kind of took off from there. Thank goodness we had Pam and the archaeology, because I would be lost without them. They really set the stage. They, one of the things that we learned, and you see on the Google map here, is that from the Hancock County Registry of Deeds, we found some, paper, primary source documents that put Thomas Fraser on the landscape before around 1776. And you'll see up the little blue line of the car there, up to around right where that Hancock is, right around there in Egypt Bay. There was a deed that was discovered at the Hancock County Registry of Deeds from 1776, where Thomas Fraser was selling land to Moses Butler. And the very interesting thing about that, places him pretty early in 1776 on the landscape there, but even sort of more interestingly enough, on the deed is he signed with an X. So we assume he was illiterate. And even more interestingly, his wife Mary signed. So yay, Mary, she got her name on a land deed in 1776 in colonial Maine. So that was another sort of interesting piece of the puzzle. He was potentially illiterate. He put his mark, and his wife signed along with him on this deed that went to Moses Butler. Moses Butler ended up purchasing a lot of land. There's still, I think, Butler Point out there that you'll find if you look at a map today. Another sort of primary source document was we found tax records. So we found tax records from the town of Goldsboro that showed he paid taxes. He was a good tax paying citizen. He had property he paid taxes on. He paid on time. He was not poor. His family was not poor. They were sort of middle income, which was another interesting piece of information. We found land surveys from 1795 that marked that piece of land that he sold to Moses Butler as Fraser's Landing. So it remained, his name was on that landscape for 30 to 40 years after he sold it. In addition, and really cool, 2 more cool things, I found him on the Revolutionary War rolls in 1780. So wow. He was an enlisted man. He was a private working in the defense of Frenchman Bay. He worked, he enlisted under Captain Henry Dyer's company of Rangers, worked for a few months there. He was under, Colonel John Allen, which at that point was someone that was very much involved on the Maine coast up Machias in the Revolutionary War. And so these little small communities of people were definitely connected in the Revolutionary War in ways that we know, but it's interesting to see on paper. And then the
Would
last,
those have been, sorry, would those have been integrated? Like, if he's African American or mulatto as the designation kind of is passed down, so he would have been fully integrated into a white regiment, or is that not known?
in the document that I've found, I haven't found the original Revolutionary War roll, but a lot of those war rolls are reprinted and reprinted and reprinted in books and things like that. So I was able to find a really good one. It's under Massachusetts, of course, because Maine was part of Massachusetts, and it gives the company that he was in. It doesn't say anything about his race in that, but it wasn't. There's nothing that leads me to believe in any of the census work that I've done or seen in terms of the number of African Americans in Maine at that time. I can't imagine that this was a just a solely Black regimen. It was, I'm pretty sure it had to have been Caucasian folks. And a lot of the names are names that I recognize over and over again as being from that area. So again, very, very interesting to think about his story, that he was, in the Revolutionary War. And that you see a lot of that. Especially you see a lot of people sort of like, there's a huge Black population. There was a huge slaves and freed slaves population that were part of the American Revolution and serving in many capacities. So it doesn't super surprise me that up here in sort of like desolate Maine, that someone who had been on the landscape since minimum 1776 was fighting alongside folks that he had sold land to and that he'd been in a community with for many years. So, and the last document that you have up here is one of the more interesting ones. This is a kind of a poor copy, but I've tried to do a little squiggle around it, and you can see we found him in the very first U.S. Census, which was done in 1790, and he is literally in the margins. So when you talk about marginalized folks, this is the creme de la creme. It's literally written in the margin, and it's hard to see, but it does say Thomas Fraser, a mulatto, his wife, and 7 children. And when you look at the typed up version of it, every so often, every so years, it would sort of type it up. He is moved over into a category at the very end, which is all free persons. And there's just all free persons that are not in one of the other categories, not native, not white. And that number is just on 9 there. So they've shifted the categories or the groupings and the way they've organized the data over the years. But that is where he sort of remained. He showed up, and his family showed up in the 1800 census. They were marked in the 1810 census, and then they were gone off the landscape archaeologically by 1820, and they were not on the 1820 census as well. So that's sort of the disappear right there, is at 1820. I don't know, don't know where he went or where his family went. Can't find the documents, any documents after that, which is very frustrating so far.
I bet. So in these successive census records that you've been able to find, is this putting him in the margin and sort of categorizing him in these other categories consistent? How is he identified and listed in the censuses in 1800 and beyond?
It's interesting. In the I don't have it with me. This is the one I've spent the most with. It's in my file. But he's shifted around. It's listed as, I think, 7 people in the white category in 1800s. I don't recall the 1810 one, but I do remember there was a shift around there. And I haven't been able to see, there's differences in the original and then how people have transposed the original, right? So even the 1791 sort of shows a different way of categorizing than when they took all this information and sort of typed it out or wrote it out. So I've been really fighting to try to find the originals of all these. I can find the redos of them, but even within those 2 versions of the same census, even in this one, you can see he's put in different categories. And I think that means something. I think, for instance, when I went to, just before this, I was trying to get a better copy of this actual, or the actual deed from 1776. And I'd gotten it from the Hancock County Registry of Deeds before, but it was old. And I went online, they have a new search. And I went online, I searched Thomas Fraser, I'd searched Butler, I'd searched a date, I'd searched just a deed, couldn't find anything. I had to call the way that it had been transcribed, the information from the original deed into this new system was such that it wasn't marked in the same way. So it almost led to yet another disappearing. Like it almost led to another sort of erasure of him from the landscape. So I think, you know, as the world, this is my little soapbox here, as we continue to try to digitize things and make them more open and readable or whatever for the public, you know, it's so important to keep the original data that you're looking at and that you're seeing, and every little thing, even if you don't think it's important, you need to keep that with when you make this new version of it, because a lot of times you're actually adding to disappearing of people, you're adding to erasure of people or erasure of really important information that connects that person to the landscape or to a class or to, you know, a family. So
Yeah, it's a good point. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So we know that Thomas Fraser and his family lived on this site, that they had a home, that they were relatively, you know, sort of middle class or, you know, consistent income with their peers. He sold land, he purchased land. He may have had a salt works, he may have had a sawmill, but that's not a whole lot to know of a person's life. What do you think is out there that's missing that you haven't, you know, what kinds of things are you not able to learn from the documents that you've found so far? What are the gaps?
Yeah, so I can't find when he was married. I can't find a marriage certificate or anything. I can't find when he died. There's no documentation for that. I haven't been able to find necessarily who owned the property before 1776. I think I may be able to figure that out, but I just haven't, it's one of those harder ones. I haven't, the registry of deeds doesn't show that yet. I don't know. I don't know how he got here. I mean, the big ones are like, I don't know how he got here and I don't know where he went. And it seems it's challenging to think that this whole family of 9 people that fought in the Revolutionary War, that his name is on 2 different pieces of landscape over there now. I mean, it's hard to imagine that he's just gone and that his family is just gone. So I want to know where he went. I want to know how he got here, when he was married, what happened to his children. It's just very frustrating. I'm not going to give up. But those are the things that everything we found, it feels like a lot between the archaeology and the documents. But then, as you said, it's not as much as, it doesn't really tell us everything we want to know just yet.
Yeah. So that sort of leads into the next question, which you probably don't know, but why down east coast of Maine? You know, how did he end up here? What are the theories, and is there a way to know that?
So the assumption of the years is that he was somehow sent here by Thomas Fraizer, who was the London merchant. So he was part of there was Lane, Son and Fraser, who was a powerful merchant banking group in London that was around till I think 1793. They financed a lot. They were a bank. They financed shipping. They financed all sorts of voyages. And he has and they have their names. They owned the land in Goldsboro, sort of divided up into 4 quadrants after, I can't remember who it was originally, after the Bingham Purchase. Anywho, so their names were all over the landscape. And so the idea was that it's like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, and often the Thomas Fraizer, Thomas Fraizer settler happens to have the same name as Thomas Fraizer. I call him London Thomas Fraizer versus settler Thomas Fraizer, and they're in the same place at the same time, even though London Thomas Fraizer wasn't physically there, but it was named on the landscape. So one of the sort of assumptions over the years is somehow he was sent here by Thomas Fraizer London as a land agent for the property, which is something that would make sense, right? So you're investing in a property, you're getting it, you've gotten a grant, you're dividing it up, you put your name on it, and then you want someone to be there to sort of like do something with the land, before it gets taken. This is still, it's like not the Wild West out here, but it's colonial Maine. So there's stuff going on. So that was the idea. And it's been really hard to figure that out. Spent a lot of time with all corners of the internet and there's a group for everything. In case you're wondering, there's actually a group of gentlemen that are from Australia and Britain that I've become buddies with because they study Lane, Son and Fraser. Anyway, I'm cuckoo looking for this man. That's another Chebacco chat. But So the other idea is that he maybe came in, he came on a ship from Boston with the first wave of settlers. How he got to Boston, I don't know, but if I sort of detract myself from his connection there and I just think about how did he physically get here and what was he doing? There's a lot of settlers that came onto the landscape in Goldsboro in 1764. Moses Butler, A. Green Crabtree, all those very early settlers were kind of showing up on the landscape at the same time, which seems weird. Like every time I put my little, my spreadsheet, it's like 1764, 1764. There's a lot of action up there in 1764. The other idea that I had was that maybe he got up here this way. Maybe he was in Boston for some reason, whether he was brought here on an enslaved ship or as an agent for Fraser, but maybe he got up here as a privateer. I mean, there were a lot of seamen and skilled seamen in the world of all ethnic backgrounds that ended up here and then continued on to work on ships and sometimes had gained their freedom that way. So there were a number of very well-known, notorious, folks like A. Green Crabtree, who was a privateer, sort of like it's like a very elevated word for a pirate in the Revolutionary War. Who sailed up and down the coast all the way up to Nova Scotia. He's someone that did land surveys as well for Fraser. It's just hard for me to believe that this guy was going up and down the coast all the way to Nova Scotia, and he literally surveyed Fraser's land and lived in the same hood, and that there wouldn't be some connection there maybe with Thomas Fraser's first voyage up this way. All this stuff I'm sort of making up, right? Because you have to start making up stories to figure out where to go next and what documents to look for next and which trails to go down. But we've got to, assuming that he got here, don't know how he got here. How did he get up there? I mean,
right.
Yeah.
So we have a few people watching on Facebook, and I just want to give a shout out. So if you have questions, if you have comments that you want to share with Marie, anything that you'd like answered, please go ahead and write them in the comment section on Facebook, and I'll make sure that we get those answered. But just to sort of wrap up with a couple of ideas is, you have what you know what you don't know, as they say, but what do you wish you knew? Like, what's the thing that's really burning in your mind about, like, if I could just know this thing about him, I feel like I would know who he was?
Well, I have 5 things I really want to know, but if I had to just pick one, I mean, I think
but you can say all 5.
Well, so I would love to know if he ran a salt works or a mill. I feel like that might be knowable. I don't know. I mean, archaeologically, it doesn't seem to be. That's a question that the archaeologist asked and looked for evidence of. But maybe there's something I haven't done a lot of primary research in terms of the journals and the diaries at Winter Harbor Historical Society yet. So maybe there's something in there. As I said before, I'd love to know where he went. But if we can't even find the death certificates, he's like, I wonder if I can know that. So out of all the things I can't know that I'd love to know, I think the biggest thing would be how he got here and why he was here. I think if I was able to know, yes, he was an enslaved person who then gained freedom, and this, he's here for that. Or yes, he was a free African-American man who was a land agent for Thomas, Fraser London. If I just knew why he was here, I think that would help put a number of different things in place. I will say too, there's always some rumors out there, when you don't know a lot about folks and you pick up one little thing and then you run with it. And one of the things that has been oft repeated, which there's no evidence for, is that his wife Mary was Native. She was a Native American, she was Wabanaki, and there's no evidence really for that. And I get a little bit nervous. I flinch a little bit when I see some of those things put forth over and over again, because then it becomes fact, but it doesn't really have into it. So I'd love to be able to put sort of that to rest. Again, unknowable, but I'd like to just maybe put that out there that we don't know that. But I'd love to know how he got here. It's a pretty amazing story to find someone's name written in a margin on the very first U.S. Census, and what was written, with his family and his wife, and then to know he was in the Revolutionary War in colonial Maine, how many miles away from Machias, where there was a very active, just up in Addisville, where there was a very active Black community, colonial times. I mean, it seems like there's some connections here that we could be able to tease out. It's just hard when the written record isn't built to reflect that. I think that's the challenge. You know, we have, as historians, have to remember that we are part of the historical record, and we want to see different stories and we want to see different people um, on paper, then we need to make sure that we are writing about them and putting them on paper so that they will, you know, be a part of that story forever. So
Well, that's the thing, like, talking a little bit about the hunt that you have to, sort of be ready for, and to seek out digitization of our resources certainly is, I mean, how amazing is that, especially during the pandemic, is that you can sit here on an island in Maine and sort of dig into the collections of all these different disparate organizations. But at the same time, as you pointed out, like, you still need to sort of get in there and see the original documents as much as possible, so that you don't rely on, I mean, a scan is different than a transcription,
right.
is different than, but I just, want to sort of give a shout out to that work that historical societies and museums are doing, is that, we care for these really great resources, and you never know what someone is out there hunting for. So if, Winter Harbor has resources that might date to that time, but it's never occurred to them that somebody cared about Thomas Fraser's salt works, unless you sat in their archive and poured through all their documents, how are you going to ever get that verified?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just find that
During COVID, I mean, you know, I've found some really cool links over the past couple of weeks, and I just have to put my request in and hope, you know, connecting with the archive in Nova Scotia and Mass Historical, and they're, you know, I just am like, please, you know, and I would love to find out, but I know I can't, and, you know, but they're all short staffed too, but it is, and I'm on the other hand getting just these same kinds of inquiries for the park as well, because people have time in their hands, but it is really important. To those primary source documents are so important. And I know we all know that, but I just keep learning that more and more with this project, because by no fault of anybody, the transcription of those primary source documents sometimes leave out details that you wouldn't know are important. And so that's one of the things that I've learned to really appreciate.
So just to sort of wrap it up, again, if anyone on Facebook has questions or comments, please don't hesitate to post them in the comment section. We're getting lots of thumbs up, but nobody questions yet. So my last question for you is, what are your next steps as a researcher, you know, and how do you know when to be done?
Well, next steps, I don't know when I'm exhausted, all these next steps. I mean, I think, you know, there's so many, in the same vein as digitizing, there's so many resources. I feel like every day I'm finding a new resource, which is fantastic. I will say, if you haven't seen this yet, there's a new resource that's been out, new to me, maybe it's been out a little bit, I don't know, I just discovered it. Slavevoyages.com. It's a digital memorial and database that traces the dispersal of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic world. And I've been using that to try to discover ships. I'm going with he was an enslaved person that came here. And if I'm going in that route for a little bit and digging down as far as I can go, I've been trying to use that to discover ships that disembarked in Boston in the mid to late 1700s, with this 1764 as my aim that I'm aiming for, because a lot of activity around there. Actually found one that disembarked in 1764 in Boston, and I found the captain, and they had 4 enslaved people on it. The names were not available in the database, and it seems like it's very intriguing to me, because there weren't many before and there weren't any after, that were leaving from London and that were stopping along the way and enslaving people and bringing them here. And this one had 4 people on it, and it was 1764. The chances that I would be able to figure out whether or not Thomas Fraser was one of those people are slim to none. But the fact that there's this digital archive out there that has thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of voyages and people moving across the Atlantic, enslaved people, that is like insane. It's so incredible. What a resource. Military records, I'm still looking for pension records. I would say that thank goodness for federal records, because you're in the military, you are in there, and it's something that you can be tracking. And I would say, I don't know when I'm going to stop, but I only stop when I get to a sort of a dead end, and then I put it away and I go towards another one until that one comes back to me. So I don't know. I'm not ready to stop yet. That's for sure. I'm going to work on it a lot this year and hopefully find something, but the pandemic.
And then what will you do with all that information?
Well, I mean, honestly, the reason I'm working on this and working on this for the park is to find and create some new stories at Acadia. I mean, we tell, and it's not just Acadia, the National Park Service, all of us. Sometimes we tell the easiest stories. We tell the easy stories over and over again because they're easy. And when I say easy, I mean they're easy to find out the answer to. They're easy to craft, and they're easy to tell because they're not they're not problematic. They don't make us think about things outside of what we know or what we want to know or what we believe. And so I feel like it's important to continue to do this research, and keep figuring it out, because we have to tell new stories, because we have lots of stories to tell. And if we just keep taking and telling the same old stories, the ones that are easy, I mean, what a boring life we'll live, right? So let's tell all the stories that we know. In some of them, this one may very well end in, I have no idea who Thomas Fraser was, how he got here, or where he went. But if I can answer why I don't know that, and what are the institutions, and what are the things in our lives, and what are the books that we read and the way we record history, if I can point to those things as being the reason why I can't know, then I think that that's just as important, because we have control over those things. I can't control that I don't know have his death certificate, but I can control about the institutions and the way that we tell stories,
Yeah,
at my job at least, and I can control how I can continue to help tell different ones. So
nice. Well, I really appreciate your time, and the research has been fascinating, and I've enjoyed our conversation a lot. I want to thank Marie Yarborough for the National Park Service, curator there, for this time and this really fascinating conversation. We will have this available through YouTube and through, it's been live streaming on Facebook. So, and a big thanks to Bar Harbor Bank and Trust for their continued support. We'll meet again for Chebacco Chats in the first week of March with somebody coming in to talk about Beatrix Farrand and her work with collecting plants and documenting the plants of MDI. So stay tuned for that one. So thanks very much. And I'm going to take us off.